this one combat is going to TPK a lot of parties. In this video, we're going to be looking at the new D&D book, Strixhaven, Curriculum of Chaos, and I'm going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This video is sponsored by Yarg's Guide to Puzzles and Traps, now on Kickstarter. More on them later. So we've had our last D&D book of the year, Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos, and today I want to talk about all the things I liked about the book, all the things I didn't like about the book, what I'm going to be using going forward from this book, and whether or not I think that it's going to be worth your money to buy. Heads up before we start, there is going to be spoilers in this video. There are going to be minor and major spoilers. I want to start off broadly with whether or not I think it's worth your money to buy. I want to give you the most value right up front. If you want to run a Magic School game, this is a book for you. If you don't want to run a Magic School game, you can probably skip this book. I'll talk about some of the things that I think are worthwhile from this book that aren't just Magic School stuff. But if you aren't running a specific Magic School setting, this probably isn't one to spend your money on unless you already own every other book. And even then, I think there are probably some third-party stuff that you'll probably get more use out of than this book. But with that out of the way, let's dive straight into it. So this book, I don't know whether I misinterpreted the marketing materials or whether the marketing materials were misleading, or whether they just didn't market it properly, but I thought this was going to be more of a setting book. And what it actually is much more of an adventure book. Most of the content in this book, most of the page count, is dedicated to the adventure that sees you go from years 1 through 4 in this magical university. About a quarter of the book is dedicated to more setting style material, and then there is a bestiary at the back, but the majority of the page count is that adventure. Now, I don't know whether I just wasn't paying attention, like I said, to the marketing of this book, but I really was not expecting so much adventure. And that in of itself is really going to colour whether or not you enjoy this book, because it's an adventure book. The book is broken down into several different sections. The start gives you a bunch of information on kind of running a game in a magical university. It gives you some setting information. It gives you quite a lot of what I think is quite useful information, even if not necessarily applied to a magic school. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the video. And then it moves into the adventure, runs that through like any 5th edition adventure. I do have some real big gripes with that we're going to talk about in what I didn't like. And then it gives you the bestiary. Pretty standard for a book like this. I just wasn't expecting it to be a book like this. I thought it was going to be more of a setting book. In terms of the things that I liked, I've got a list here, so we're just going to go down in the order that I've written things down as I've been reading it. So I read through the book. Anytime something noteworthy came up, I just jotted it down, and we'll just go through. This is no particular order. Nothing is more important than each other. Just what I thought I liked as I was reading through. So first up, magic item prices. The book lists several new magic items and a couple of existing magic items, and it gives them direct prices. Now, this is going to seem like a really minor thing to some people, but one of my huge gripes with 5th edition is how it handles money and how almost nothing gets an appropriate price attached to it. The prices in this book are what they are. They're not very good. I personally wouldn't price any of the items listed in this book for what they've been priced at, but they have been given a price, which gives a new Dungeon Master a place to start. I think that this book would do really well with newer Dungeon Masters. The kind of magic school setting is very appealing, especially for younger Dungeon Masters, for newer Dungeon Masters. There's a level of safety net that you get from being around so many adults in the setting that I think makes it appealing for kind of a first adventure to run. So I'm really glad that they included prices in this. I hope that that is something that they continue to do, even if I don't necessarily agree with the prices they've listed. At least they've listed something. At least it gives a Dungeon Master a starting point. Next up there is a little note on Strixhaven accessibility. It's a really small sidebar. It just mentions that this is a magic school and the physical world will adapt to respond to the needs of the particular student using the school at the time. It's a really minor thing, but it goes a long way to be more accessible and to include people with disabilities. that's always a win in my book. Overall, the art continues to be excellent in this book. I think we've come a long way from the kind of first generation 5th edition art, which I was never a huge fan of. I always preferred the Pathfinder style. But certainly in the last couple of years, I think the art in the D&D books has really stepped up in terms of its quality. There's a whole bunch of new monsters and creatures in this book. A lot of them I really like. The clockwork stuff in terms of kind of the machines that help run the university, as well as the mage hunters, are probably my favourite creatures in the whole book, though they are also a problem, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Now, even though the majority of the book is an adventure, I thought it did a really good job of showing what magic looks like outside of an adventuring setting. So given that most of the books are aimed at player characters who are out adventuring, all of our kind of context of magic up until now really has been in an adventuring sense. It was really nice in this book to explore how magic is used outside of an adventuring context, what magic looks like outside of a fight, and all of those kind of little details. There's lots of minor flourish details all throughout the book that I think could serve as great inspiration for dungeon masters and players for how to flavour magic in the world. There's also a lot of extra detail that just make this feel like it's in a magical D&D style fantasy world. My favourite example of this is the University Cafe. They have a menu, and one of the items on the menu is cockatrice gizzard on rye sandwiches. And I just really love that. Little details like that help ground you in the world, make you feel like this isn't just an isolated thing sitting on top of a regular world, that it all kind of melds together. It's great world building. There's also some really interesting mechanics in terms of being a student. So the mechanics for studying and doing exams are simple enough not to bog you down, but there is kind of a mini game inside of the game for you to be able to do exams, which fulfills that kind of wish fulfillment that you get if you're playing a magic school game. You want to have kind of the student experience in that. That's part of the appeal of it. And there's also several other kind of mini games, including holding down a job, doing extracurricular activities, and also having relationships with NPCs. There's a whole relationship tracking system that lets you figure out whether you're friends or foes with someone, whether you are romantically invested in someone, and you get different benefits and boons and drawbacks based on those things. But like I said, the majority of the book is an adventure, so let's talk about some of the things that I liked from the point of view of this being an adventure module. First up, each of the 4 individual adventures that make up this larger whole, you get one for each year of study in Strixhaven. Each of those give you if you're running this as a standalone adventure, piece of advice. So it says how the context of the adventure changes based on running this as a standalone, and how to lead into this adventure if it's a later adventure if you haven't run the previous ones. That's a really nice touch. I think that it's really important to have that in a book like this, because some people won't want to run the entire thing, but they might just want to run a small part of it. The adventure also plays into a lot of the tropes that you would expect from a magic school. You're going to attend class, you're going to do extracurricular activities, you will have rivalries with other students, you'll make new friends, you'll attend exams, you'll have to balance doing your schoolwork with saving the world. It's very much playing into those tropes of attending a magic fantasy school. I also like that at the end of the adventure, in the climax, it gives you a very brief kind of paragraph telling you what you should do if the players fail, how the world changes if your players fail. It's not much, it's only a couple of sentences, but it's enough to give a newer dungeon master specifically some ideas of where to go if the players fail and how they can recover from that loss of a total party kill. So onto the things that I didn't like. Kicking things off, we have how trope heavy it was. That is one of the things that I did like in terms of it hitting all the beats that you'd expect from something like this, but it doesn't give you anything beyond what you'd expect. There's nothing, I think, new or exciting. There's nothing unexpected here. This is very much an adventure where you go into it and you are going to hit all the beats that you would expect from a story like this, but you're not going to be surprised at any point along the way, I don't think, at least. Pretty heavy spoiler warning for the adventure. So the main plot of the adventure, the driving force of it, is a villain that's a former student that is trying to do a really bad thing. It's a Dark Lord situation. And I think that while that is what you would expect from a magic school, it's very Harry Potter, and it's what I think a lot of people would expect. It's not the most interesting. They do subvert your expectation of the Dark Lord by making the Dark Lord a giant frog, which took me by surprise because I don't think of bullywugs as particularly menacing. So that was a nice subversion to have what I think is quite a ridiculous character be the Dark Lord. But it was really uninspired. The villain is literally a reskinned monster. So they present the stat block with the art, but they also say this is just a reskinned version of this other creature that you can find in the book. They don't make any changes to it to make it more interesting, to make it more personal. It's just, here is an NPC that we've reskinned. That's going to be your main villain. And from a story point of view, because this is tied to Magic the Gathering, the book kind of holds itself back. So the main villain, Murgaxor, this bullywug who's been wronged by the school and wants to steal everyone's life force to become immortal. He's working with a group that I think are just inherently more interesting than he is. He's working with a secret organization called the Auric, and they have some kind of lore in the Magic the Gathering setting of Strixhaven, and I think that's why we didn't see them as villains. But even based on the tiny amount of information we get on them in the book, they are way more interesting than this kind of bullywug Dark Lord was. And all throughout the book, I found myself waiting for the moment where it was revealed that the Auric were behind this, that this secret organization was behind it, and their leader was involved in some way, and then it ended up being a frog. So it subverted my expectation of the Dark Lord in that sense, but I don't think it was a positive subversion. And although the adventure gives you advice on how to run each of the years as a standalone adventure, I really don't see any reason why you would. This is very much set up to be a linear start at year 1, move through year 4 adventure, and everything kind of intertwines in a way that works quite well. But if you wanted to run a standalone adventure, I don't see why you would use the specific plot lines from this book for that. You just take the setting information and make your own, I think, because everything is so tied to what comes before it. You have to recount the events of previous adventures, even though that your players aren't playing them. And it just feels a little lackluster. A few minor things that I didn't really like. I thought the idea of having negative relationship points was really interesting, but as the book presents it, those can only be gained when the player decides, and I think that you'll get some players that would never decide to give themselves negative relationship points, even if they're doing something really mean-spirited to another student in the university. So I think it's weird that they didn't put that under the auspices of the DM. I also thought the encounter maps, while each are beautiful in their own way, were pretty inconsistent. We get a blend of the kind of coloured Mike Shea versions and the black and white Dyson logo style maps throughout the book, and it's a bit inconsistent to have coloured battle maps and black and white colour maps. I'd have preferred they stuck with one over the other. Personally, I'd prefer Dyson logo style black and white maps for all the encounters, and then Mike Shea style coloured illustrations for all of the wider level maps. My biggest problem with this adventure comes down to its encounter design, and this is where we're going to get into kind of really specific spoiler territory, so need to dive in and kind of explain some of the adventure plot here. So in the first run of adventures, level 1 through 4, in your first year of study at Strixhaven University, you cannot die. Well, no, you cannot die. Every encounter gives a kind of purview of if all the players go unconscious or there's a TPK looking situation, this adult is going to arrive and dispatch whatever they're fighting. So in one adventure, that might mean that a professor will suddenly appear to fight the monster. It might mean an adult member of faculty that isn't a professor will just leap into the fray all of a sudden. It doesn't give you any information for, oh, they should be in this fight the whole time. It's just, if you all go unconscious or you're about to die, they are going to come and save you. This makes the first part of the adventure kind of perfect for running with kids and younger players, because it takes away a lot of the lethality of that first tier of play. But I think it's going to make some players feel like there really is no threat to the adventure, which can really put some people off. But that's not really the biggest problem. The problem is, once you get into the tier 2 adventure, once they hit kind of level 5, the gloves just completely come off. There's no more professors saving you, and one of your first encounters in level 5 is incredibly deadly. So throughout the tier 2 adventure, the players are kind of investigating and dancing around this monster called a mage hunter. It's an incredibly powerful creature. It is CR5 on its own, and there are 2 of them. And the only time that you really encounter them properly is after the players complete what they think is the climax of their second year. They kind of go into a locker room. It's a fairly small room. It's maybe 40 by 60 feet with pretty dense terrain, kind of low ceilings, not a very big space. They go into this space and 2 of these mage hunters will attack them. They're level 5 at this point, and that is a CR 9 to 10 encounter with 2 creatures specifically designed to attack magic users. Now, even though the book says, oh, you can be any class when you're playing in this magic university, if you're running a Strixhaven game, chances are the majority of your party are going to be casters. They're going to be spell slingers. So you're going to have wizards, sorcerers, warlocks, squishy classes. At level 5, a wizard is reasonably going to have 30 to 35 HP. One of these mage hunters, on average, will be doing 30 damage every turn. And there are 2 of them. Not only that, but they have the ability to change forms so that they can kind of hover in the air. They have bonuses to their stealth, so they can hide, lying in wait for the players to arrive. And they have abilities that make them redirect half damage from spells, or give them the chance to redirect half damage from spells against the caster. Throw all that together, this one combat is going to TPK a lot of parties. In a party with more than one caster, I don't think there would be any way that they make it through this entire combat without losing someone, unless you as the DM play the monsters incredibly reserved, at which point, why have 2 of them? Now, you might be asking yourself, why am I so upset about this? CR is a absolute garbage system. Why do we pay attention to it anyway? The reason it bothered me is because during D&D Celebration this year, during the panels, they talked a lot about their ethos on monster design, how they're approaching monsters with a new design mindset to give them a more balanced challenge rating, to make challenge rating more of a useful thing for Dungeon Masters. They have started to do this in some of the books we've already seen this year. They've started to tweak the monster stat blocks. We see it a little bit in this book as well, but then they just ignore their own guidelines for creating a challenge. There is no reason that anyone should throw a CR 9 or 10 encounter at a CR 5 party, especially without the chance to prepare, without them having any idea what's going on. This encounter is going to kill players, and it is going to kill players in a way that feels like we walked into this room, the DM wanted to kill us. They had decided one or all of us were going to die in this room, and that's just how it is. And for new DMs especially, who don't have the context of having played this game for a long period of time, who don't know that challenge rating is absolute garbage, who don't recognize, oh, this looks like it is going to be vastly overpowered, who just trust that the product they have bought is going to be fit for purpose, they're going to run that encounter as is. And there's a good chance, because of the abilities listed out in the stat block of these monsters, they're going to run this encounter with those monsters in their kind of hovering form, rolling stealth checks to hide, and getting the drop on the players. And if they get a surprise round on a full party of casters, someone is dying turn 1. Almost guaranteed. They do way too much damage that if they aren't really pulling their punches as the DM, someone is going to die. And I think it is such poor encounter design that we are that far in the lifespan of 5th edition products that there is no excuse for this existing. And this is a problem that kind of applies from this point on in the adventure. There are random tables throughout the rest of the adventure to be like, oh, in year 2, in year 3, in year 4, here are some random encounters you can have. Several of those tables have combinations of multiple monsters that result in a CR well above what the particular adventure, what the year is designed for. And you get multiple instances of these CR 9 or 10 or 12 encounters when the players are levels 5 or 6. And I think that there's going to be a lot of character deaths that are unexpected on both sides. So the DM is going to be like, okay, I want to spice things up. Let's roll a random encounter. Oh, I've got this thing. This thing's CR12. They must think that the players can handle it because they put it in the book. Run the kind of encounter as standard, players all die. Or some of the players start dying in ways that will feel really unsatisfying because it will never feel like they had a fair fight. And I know from personal experience that some parties can handle well above their challenge range. And sometimes you want to throw something that seems overwhelming at them. But these things should always be a choice, and they should be kind of up to DM fiat and not prescribed in the book where you expect things are going to have been balanced out for a reasonable level of enjoyment. So if you do run this adventure, I strongly recommend that you don't put both mage hunters in that locker room. Just put one, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Now, before we get into what I'm going to rip from this book and put into my own game, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Yarg's Guide to Puzzles and Traps. Now, I run an almost completely homebrew game, which means I'm a huge fan of anything that I can take and just lift and drop right into my game. Yarg's Guide is a collection of puzzles and traps for 5th edition that has been designed to be able to be dropped into any setting, any campaign at a moment's notice. The book contains more than 50 traps and puzzles, and each one of them has a death rating, and that quickly lets you know how much of a threat the trap is intended to be. Many of the entries in the book come with detailed diagrams showing you the layout of the encounter, as well as details on triggers, effects, and solutions. There are also digital maps included, which have a secret and a triggered version of the trap, which will help you to hide them from your players, as well as a ton of evocative art showing the adventurers dealing with the challenges presented throughout the book. This makes it really convenient to be able to just drop one of these puzzles or traps in front of your players whenever you need one. This is particularly useful if you want to reuse certain published adventures and modules, but you want to change up the traps. Maybe you're running something that your players have run through before, but they're using different characters. Well, now you can swap out a lot of the puzzles and trap encounters from that with ones from this book to keep things fresh for you and the players. The project is already fully funded and is unlocking stretch goals to reveal more puzzles and maps to deploy in your game. There's a link to the Kickstarter in the description below, and the campaign is running until December 14th, so be sure to check it out as soon as you're done with this video. And thanks again to Giants of the North for supporting the channel. Okay, so I've had my rant about the encounter design. What am I actually going to use from this book? So for me personally, I've got no plans on running a magic school adventure anytime soon, so a lot of the material in this book I won't be lifting out to use directly, but there's a lot of world building material and little flavour things dotted throughout the book that I really want to use. Things like taking the tavern that's included or taking some of the downtime areas. Just lift those wholesale. They come with maps, they come with NPCs, they come with menu items. Just take that entirely, put it in a different setting. There are also several monsters and creatures and NPCs in this book that I really want to take. You could basically take any of the NPCs and add them to your growing roster of characters that your players can interact with. That's a really good way to come up with new people for your players to meet. Lift the names, personalities, motivations, artwork for NPCs out of adventure modules, especially if you just run homebrew. Really great source for NPCs. And then in terms of monsters, the mage hunters, even though they are part of my big problem with the book, are actually really cool, and I'm definitely going to be using those in my kind of Cursed Sands of Ash campaign that I'm running at the moment. And then the Auric, the magical secret society that wants to undo Strixhaven, they're really cool. I've always got a place for more kind of magic cults in my setting. They look really cool, they've got cool masks, and their leader has a clear and distinct motivation. They want to summon the blood avatar. Great, I'll just rip that entire storyline out and that as a plot hook, and I can use that in my own games. In terms of whether or not you should buy this, like I said at the start, if you want to run a magic school in 5th edition, this is going to give you a lot of information, even if you don't use the adventures. You could use the majority of information in this book without using the kind of central adventure. So anytime the players go to class, all of their class-based interactions and encounters, all of the extracurricular stuff, all of the relationship stuff, everything that isn't tied to the main centralized story, you could apply that to any story that you wanted to run. You just need to weave a new connecting narrative through it. If you don't want to run a magic school, this book is not going to give you much in the way of useful, tangible things for the table. There's several new spells which are pretty cool. You might want to check those out. Some of the monsters are pretty cool. The magic items, I probably wouldn't say you want to get them. There's a couple that are interesting, but certainly not worth buying the book for. And then there is some world building information that if you spend the time, you can extract out and use in your own game. But if you're not running a magic school, this probably isn't going to be worth picking up for you. I'd really like to know, though, what you thought of the book down in the comments. And I'd particularly be interested to hear how many people would actually run or play a magic school campaign. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you are even interested in. Is this book even something that you wanted before it was available? If you want to keep watching, I've got another video right up here. But until next time, happy gaming.